All right, 6:35. We can get started here. Um, Good evening. My name is Randall Coleman. I am a member of the board on the Vermont Archaeological Society. Thank you all for joining us tonight for our talk titled Locating New England's Woodland Villages, Landscape Scale Geophysics in the Upper Connecticut River Valley. Our speaker tonight is Jonathan Alperstein, and as a quick bio background here, Jonathan is a third-year graduate student at Dartmouth College in the Ecology, Evolution, Environment, and Society PhD program. He completed his BA at Vassar College in 2018, and prior to Dartmouth College, he worked in CRM in Oahu and Kauai for 2 years. Jonathan, thank you for joining us tonight, and I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to my talk today. I'm really honored to be here, and I really appreciate the warm introduction, Randall. The research and project I'm going to be going over tonight is not just my own, but a collaborative effort, and could not have been done without the lab group that I'm part of. First, I'm going to give a quick explanation of who we are, and then I'm going to show a few of the projects in New England that we've worked on, and then I'm going to go through a quick tour of the sites that we work on along the Connecticut River Valley. As someone who is relatively new to learning the archaeology record of this region, I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this topic, and I really hope that you find our interesting, exciting too. I'm sure there's many people in the audience here that probably knows more about the subject than I do, and I'm really looking forward to sharing our results, as well as learning from everyone here that's here today. So first, the lab I'm part of is the Sparkle Lab, which is the Spatial Archaeometry Lab here at Dartmouth College. And we are well known for our remote sensing and geophysical work, and work in a variety of places all across the world, including here is Puerto Pueblo in New Mexico, the Big Island of Hawaii, a small pyramid site in Tlaxcala, Mexico, and here's Turkmenkarohoyuk, a large tell site in the Konya Plain of Turkey. But recently, we've also been really dedicated to work locally. This originally started as a project of the pandemic to really look close to home and see what the archaeology was doing in our region. And so my advisor started the new Dartmouth Archaeological Station at Lewiston, or what we know as Dazzle. So we're located actually right here in Vermont on 15 River Road. Come by, hopefully we'll be having a public open house soon, but this is where we house all the equipment that we use to do all of our large landscape scale surveys. So now briefly, I'm just going to kind of go over some quick things that we're doing in the region as a whole. Recently this summer, we worked on Damaris Cove Island in Maine, which is famous for having one of the earliest settlements in New England. And here we did a series of drone-based LiDAR research, as well as a pedestrian survey of the island as well. We've also been working in Vermont in kind of the Paleo period. This is with my colleague Nathaniel Kitchell, where here we did ground penetrating radar of a bog near Mount Holly. Here in 1848, there was a mammoth find, and we know that it was documented that half the mammoths was still in the ground. So we're hoping to use our equipment in order to find it. Unfortunately, we, using this techniques, couldn't find it in this bog, but we're hoping that this winter to go to a different bog and see if it's in another bog. And then moving even closer to campus at Dartmouth, we worked on a project called Digging Dartmouth, where this is we were digging up a late 18th century cellar on Dartmouth's Green. And what's really exciting about this site too is we actually found a late Republic of Vermont copper coin here, which showcases how even though this is on the New Hampshire side, this area along the river was really associated with the Vermont itself. So I just kind of wanted to share how this stuff is all associated with the state of Vermont. And so finally, it brings up to the main purpose why you're all here tonight is to hear about kind of our work on the archaeological investigations of ancestral Abenaki villages in the Upper Connecticut River Valley. We started this project in the historic Oxbow district, specifically Newbury, Vermont, because historic maps and accounts tell us that this is where the city of Cowes was located. Cowes has been a point of interest as an important farming center in northern New England, and this part of the river's geology has caused the river to form wide meanders, which is why it gets the name today as the historic Oxbow district. Cowes, which is well documented as the capital of the Cowsic Band of the Western Benaki. We also know as historians, such as Dartmouth's own Colin Calloway, that this wasn't just the capital for the Western Abenaki, but also a site of refuge for early colonial period aggressions by the British during the 7 Years' War, King Philip War, and the Pequot War. We know that there's a huge influx of other indigenous communities migrating up and staying at Cowes for a certain period of time. But it's also really critically important to know that we know there's a French missionary here. It's not just associated with archaeology in New England. And we also know specifically that it remains today as a huge major grain production for all of northern New England. Going back to just our main site areas, what also makes this place really special is it's at the confluence of three rivers, the Connecticut River, the Ammonoosuc, and the Wells River. As part of my own dissertation research, I've been researching the substance settlement patterns of archaeological New England, and I've gone back closely to examine the faunal and macrobotanical remains at sites found in New England. And one of the themes I've been really interested in is about the seasonal fish runs of New England. And specifically within this area, we know that this is an area where alewife and cod were terminal in this specific point. So this is an area where we know that this is where only a few of these seasonal fish runs would terminate here, causing it a huge spot for seasonal amounts of food. And this has changed currently today, but we know that this was a really important start. And in 1786, there was an issue for salmon to continue on there, where the state of New Hampshire actually published one of the first laws in order to protect salmon runs all the way up to Connecticut into this portion. Now we have tons of historic and ethnographic data on Cowes. We know it's an important place of agriculture, so we know we should have very detailed examples of this in the archaeological record, but the archaeology of New England has been ignored by much of the academic world. This has led to a gap in the archaeological record due to preservation reasons and lack of data collection. In addition, due to the myth of the vanishing Indian, colonialism, and the development, many archaeologists are under the impression that even if there was a large indigenous settlements at one point in time, these would not be visible or preserved within the archaeological record. Or if they were preserved, they're extremely hard to see. This idea has changed over the last 40 years, where few archaeologists who study this region are under the impression that coastal New England did indeed have larger full-time settlements. Yet if we take a look at the ethnographic data and early colonial texts, it's clear that there might be larger indigenous settlements that existed beyond the coastal boundaries of New England. Many archaeologists have asked for larger landscape site surveys within this region to determine if there's evidence of these large villages within the archaeological record. And this call to action is where our lab, Sparkle, comes in. We are going to use landscape scale remote sensing to see if we could find these settlements. Now, these are kind of the main research questions that I've been focused on that will be part of my overall dissertation. But all three of these questions really come across of the two main debates in archaeological New England, which is the Great Maize debate, why was maize adopted so late, and how much are the ancestral monarchy relying on maize in this region, as well as the very famous question, where are the large village settlements of New England? We see these just over in the Hudson River, we see it in coastal, but there should be more of these. And one of the really critical things is about the agriculture is because we often consume in archaeology that agriculture is a catalyst for sedentary villages, ceramics, and social stratification. Yet due to the acidic soils, macrobotanical material in the archaeological record is quite rare. Moreover, even when it does show up, it appears not to be in large enough quantities to seem to have played a significant role in the settlements of this region. And finally, because I am in an environmental program as well, I'm really fascinated about what the implications are if these settlements do exist on what this means for New England in this region prior to European colonization. In 2019, an American Antiquity article was published to answer many of these questions. This is not my own work. These archaeologists also recognize the scarcity of house sites and known village sites. Out of these 20 sites here seen here are the just over 20 sites are all the roughly known woodland house sites in the archaeological record that have been documented. I was actually really delighted by this paper because it answers one of our critical questions, is what would a pre-colonial house look like in the archaeological record? And they even have a really nice supplementary data set where you can find all the publications and chase back the original citations. And so when we were trying to figure out what these settlements would look like, I gave a really good look at this paper and was really excited about specifically 16 and 17 here, which is along the Connecticut River, especially number 17, because this is the Fairleigh County, the Orange County Longhouse of Fairleigh, which in its citation from 1993 is a report of a dark stain eroding from the banks of the Connecticut River. And we actually became aware of this in one of our own pedestrian surveys of this region. But what we found there was a clear buried egg horizon that we predict would have contained this cultural material. So we can still see these egg horizons all throughout the Connecticut River now. And so we're perplexed by this inconsistency between a true house site and non-true house site. And then on top of it, because we weren't used to this archaeological record, we often thought that this area was dominated by what we would originally assumed was like wigwam style houses versus a longhouse style, which we knew were originally associated with the Iroquois. In actuality, as many of us know, the housing style of this region was much more diverse. For example, if you look at other Algonquin communities and their ethnographic record, such as the Ho-Chunk of Wisconsin, we know that they have built over 8 different style of lodges. And since doing my own personal research, we know that for a long time, we would assume in this area that the dominant houses for the early woodland period would be these subterranean house basins. But we also know in this archaeological record that longhouses have existed in this portion of New England for quite some time, including in colonial texts, where there was known stuff of Iroquois expansion along in the Vermont Champlain area. And there's also a description of longhouses being uncovered in the Hunter site. In this review, they don't include Hunter site because of the documentation, but Sargent excavated that in the 1980s. That is just across the river from Skitchawag, which is obviously one of the most famous house sites in the woodland period for the region. And then also what is really important is that in 1995, there was an actual very large longhouse documented in Norridgewock, Maine. And this is really crucial for us when we were trying to figure out what these settlements would look like, because now we know that we're going to be looking for subterranean house basins, subterranean wigwams, longhouses of multiple different sizes. And so it becomes that we're not looking for like a very clear cut of what these settlements could look like. And so this is kind of the background for then starting our initial surveys of this region. I'm going to start kind of along the river. So I'm going to go to the farthest southern portion that we worked on. This is what we know in our group as Bobcat Mound. This is located through public LiDAR data, and it sticks out in the LiDAR data as a square mound feature compared to its surroundings. And many of the earliest archaeologists who have worked in this area have speculated that Hopewellian mound culture could have persisted this far east, yet there seems to be an absence of these mounds east of the Hudson River. And we would expect these mounds in this region because packed antiquity collections know that a lot of this material culture from Hopewellian communities were coming into the Northeast in the archaeological record. And also, while it's been ignored by many archaeologists, Augustine Mound in New Brunswick is an extremely far east Hopewellian mound site that it's only one known, but there is one that does exist in this region. This mound has been discussed in historical town documents of Haverhill, and we began surveying it in last spring in 2021, and then began, after getting the permit, excavating it that fall of 2021. To determine the nature of this mound, we used a step excavation, and this is in order to get a detailed look at the stratigraphy of the mound to see if there was any non-natural formations or changes to the stratigraphy that would suggest that this is a cultural feature. Unfortunately, as you can tell from this image and the stratigraphy, that this does indeed, like, it is a natural feature. It is not a cultural creation. And while this was frustrating, we did find artifacts through the step excavation, including multiple colonial artifacts, glass, mica, square nails, and a glazed drain. Due to the architectural nature of these artifacts, we did a few additional test pits on top of the mound that were completed in order to figure out what the extent of this site was and to get a better understanding of the mound's occupation. These test units included square nails and a brick fragment, and also including one flake as well. Most likely, this material culture date shows that it's most likely primarily late 18th century based off the one of the nails that we have, although the lower nail stuff now I'm looking at is probably mid 19th century. But we know that there's no household site known on this during the incorporation of Haverhill in 1763. The single chert flake, which is incredibly small, this is in the top left corner there, was identified from one of our lithic experts in our lab, and it shows that at one place this could have been an indigenous occupied place, but more excavations on top of this mound would be needed. Most likely what we're looking at in this site is a remnant delta from Glacial Lake Hitchcock or some other form of extent terrace. Now to kind of continue going farther up the river, this was just south of this oxbow there. That's what that site is in Battle Bridge State Park. Now we're moving farther up to this, the lower, smaller of the great oxbows here at a site, well, the place is known as Harkdale Farm. It is the smaller of the great two oxbows. Excavations occurred at this farm as part of the Newberry Prehistory Project. And from these excavations in the upper and lower pasture, artifacts were assigned to the Middle Woodland period, about 1000 to 2000 before present. But the Newberry Prehistory Project remains a gray, unpublished literature held by the state, and most of the main meadow area was visibly barren of artifacts. But there were some bedrock outcrops in the upper terrace that contained lithics and early colonial artifacts. And from the 1980s excavations, no architectural features were discussed or interpreted. The lack of larger features is because most of these features were done by 50 centimeter units, which were too small to see any signs of architecture in the stratigraphy. First, we're going to start at what my advisor refers to as Harkdale Fort, which is located on the higher terrace. This site was initially interpreted as a 1930s barn. This is state site BROR 18. Unfortunately, due to the size, shape, and material culture surrounding it, we would suggest that it's much older. This fort is also where we see nails and other colonial trash, and a multitude of indigenous lithics eroding from the soils and cows kicking up material. So this is a collection of the metal artifacts. Most of the nails that we're finding in this site date prior to the 19th century, rose medallion nails and other hand wrought nails. As well as here's some of the colonial ceramics and glassware, as well as some of the quartz flakes we found on the surface. My advisor's interpretation of this fort as a revolutionary structure was used to prevent British invasion from the north, and our plan was to attempt to see if the walls of the fort were still there and to get information from within and outside of the boundaries of the fort. To decide whether we would lay out the unit, we set up the radar, ground penetrating radar on top of the terrace and used to determine the depth of the bedrock. We did this because the bedrock for this feature was exposed, so we didn't know actually how much soil was actually intact. From this, we laid out a 2x2 excavation unit on the part where we knew there would be a thick enough soil to get deep enough stratigraphy and hope that there'd be some intact portions. So within this unit, we uncovered stratigraphy of a gravel layer, which we are interpreting as the floor of the building. While this colonial structure is very cool, the reason why I really want to showcase this is not just to showcase the colonial artifacts, but the layer beneath it, which revealed tons of intact indigenous features. And out of all the work that we've done, has showcased the largest amount of material. This pre-colonial layer contains lithics, charcoal, faunal material, mostly avian, but the most diagnostic material we covered were these stone tools. So here's a showcase of some of the lithics that we have. This is some of the bird bone that we uncovered, some of the drills. And then here we found our most diagnostic artifact. This material, which we now can date to the Middle and Terminal Archaic, was the period we see right before the adoption of ceramics into this region. And while this was an amazing find, our original question was to try to find late woodland settlements, and this is obviously older than what we expected. But what we are happy about is that this showcases some of the earliest occupations along the Connecticut River, since Glacial Lake Hitchcock would have existed over the current landscape for much time, showcasing as Glacial Lake Hitchcock drained, communities moved in along the banks of the river once it started to form. Since this project, this was from last year, but since then, this past spring in 2022, we went out there with a project with the Oxbow High School and got to just teach students at the high school about the material culture of the region, as well as we did a small test unit with them. And we, through that, actually found some trade beans and late woodland ceramics. And so unfortunately, it was an incredibly thin, small layer, but we're really excited. So since then, we have actually found material from a little bit more recent work that we're excited about. And now going into the largest portion of the area, which is the meadow. Now, prior to the 1980s excavations and our excavation of the fort revealing archaic material, we turned towards the river to look at new terraces in order to find younger archaeology sites. This area is referred to as the meadow once again because, and there is no visible artifacts on the surface. This is what makes this site really special. This is where we implemented our landscape scale geophysics. Our geophysical survey started primarily with a magnetometry cart. This is completed and was possible due to the contributions of the Newcomb Institute. And in theory, we originally planned that this would be the best equipment to use the job. And as you can see here, this is the extent of the magnetic survey we've completed so far in this region. Early on, I'll show focus of it, we found these strong elliptical features, these dark shaded lines, and we really thought that maybe this is what it is. I originally thought that these were longhouses. Unfortunately, we actually tested it again with ground penetrating radar before continuing, and it turns out that we were mapping bedrock. What is nice is that this point that you see at the bottom, this broken point here, with the Oxford students, we put in a few units over near those dark elliptical stains and actually did find not too much pre-contact material, but we did find this nice point. Shungi said there was a site there and we were digging in areas that haven't been previously excavated. So this area was like unknown prior to us working there. Now, we're not the first people to use magnetometry in the area. Mary Conger and Jennifer Birch in 2019 used a magnetic survey in order to find longhouse sites. This was in obviously just west of the Hudson River. And in this area, they've kind of showcased what we thought would be looking for darker stains. Here, what they actually were trying to showcase was the linear hearths within the unit, which was really nice because when we were looking at our mag data, we were trying to see what other people have done. This is the only other magnetic survey that's been done close to this region that's been trying to use this to find these sites. And what we found through them too, as well, is that a lot of the bedrock of the whole region is actually highly magnetic, which causes a lot of anomalies to point out that aren't truly cultural artifacts. So while we were gathering tons of data extremely fast, magnetics ended up not being the best solution for us. Still, our lab didn't stop there. We also collected and used other features, both GPR and soil resistivity. So I used this photo as my main photo to showcase you all because you can see soil resistivity being completed in the foreground, the magnetometer car in the middle ground, and then all the way in the farthest out is me with the ground penetrating radar. And we're only, I want to point out, we're working in this area because obviously the cornfields are up still. So we were restricted to where we could work in this region due to once the corn is harvested, we were able to move farther into the area. So there is a bit of a sampling bias for when we're looking at this, which I'm currently trying to actively correct. And so we spaced multiple grids along the meadow and tried to get a sample of what was occurring there. And what we found out is, here's me with our ground penetrating radar and some of our features that we're able to come over. This is what the data looks like. And we were able to find these anomalies. And we are also not the first people to do radar in the Northeast, but actually finding published radar surveys is actually very slim. And so one of the only people that's ever published a slice or actual like 3D version of radar comes from this 1994 paper where they're using it to actually map corn hills in Cape Cod, which is really exciting because it's something that we're possibly hoping to look for. And this is something I did not know was necessarily going to be possible with our resolution. So I'm constantly going to be looking for these and continuing to look for this on top of what we've already found. And also, as I mentioned, classic soil resistivity, ERT, electroresistivity topography has been really popular in Europe and other forms of geophysical surveying techniques. But here in our Sparkle Lab, we've been really shown that classical resistivity survey is incredibly slow, but really successful in order to uncover past archaeological features. And then here is what's really exciting. So all three techniques, magnetometry, resistivity, and radar, show unique features that others have failed to show. And so this is the same grid with all three different features, all three different techniques shown. And while we were concerned that the soil might not be ideal for ground penetrating radar, but in practice, radar was pivotal, not only showcasing the stratigraphy of the soils, but from our slices, we were able to uncover a few possible features that could be a potential house basin. Now, this is why I showed this one. This is our first circular anomaly that we thought could be a possible house. And when we found this, we were like, okay, we didn't quite understand what it was at first, but we thought if there was one house, maybe there would be multiple of these anomalies in the radar. And so that's what we did. We expanded our radar survey. We did two, this is essentially a 40 by 240 by 40s, and this is a 40 by 80 on the bottom here. And we actually were able to find other circular anomalies within the radar data. And these circular anomalies we thought could be house sites. Which one I really want to point out is this farther one here too, is though it's not as clear. It looks like to us is almost a possible rebuilding episode, which can showcase more of a possible insight into the settlement patterns of this area. And here's one of the other issues too that we can find, that even though we've used radar to find these anomalies, they're incredibly difficult still to find with even in the radar profiles, or also known as radagrams. And so you can still sort of make out little cuts and house basin features within it, but it becomes a very difficult to determine and process. And so while I'd like to say that we've tried answering many of our questions and have possibly found maybe not Cowas, but another village in the region, and some people refer to this area as Lower Cowas, we cannot confidently claim this as a village based on our geophysical data. And this is due to the lack of or absence of published other geophysical surveys in the area. And so we don't want to take the interpretive leap just based off of what we're finding in the radar as possible house features or as a village site as in total. And we decided that solution for this was to excavate one of these anomalies. And so we set up an excavation over one of these anomalies to determine if these features are truly house sites. So we chose the best ones. We chose the most circular one that was most clear, as like clearly what looked like a culturally made artifact within the slice maps. And I'm just showcasing this again because this is why we didn't want to make the leap. There's so few actually known house sites in the area that have been published that we really didn't want to make this jump leap, because this would have been incredibly paradigm breaking, at least maybe not for coastal New England, but for northern New England, this would have been unheard of. So we really want to be careful about making this big leap. We planned the unit by cross-sectioning one of these anomalies, as I mentioned, and tried to figure out soil specifically what was happening within the feature and without the feature. And when we began to excavate, we noticed that there were historical plow marks preserved in the plan view of the unit. And these plow lines were going against the current gain of the field. I usually skip this slide, but I thought with this audience, you'd be able to find it. I'm like total nerd for this moment. And I feel like this is absolutely beautiful that we can actually see these really well-preserved plow marks within the soil here. Because generally we're always taught, at least I was taught, that the soils here don't preserve these things in this subtly, but here I was hoping we'd have really good preservation. And as I mentioned, these plow marks go against the current way that the current crops are being grown. And when talking to, especially where we were working, when talking to the current landowners of it, this was prior to when they bought the land. So they've been maintaining it consistently for a while. So we can date these plow marks to prior to 1930, which is really exciting. So unfortunately, we actually were originally only going to do one cross-section. We ended up doing two because we couldn't quite decipher the stratigraphy. And so we had to expand it going both ways. So first we did this first one, actually this far one, which unit A we call, and then here's unit B. And so this is our result. This is we do a lot of like photogrammetry and model making in our lab. So we have taken like detailed photos of every single step along the way that we've taken it, so that we have it all preserved, really well documented, even better than what we could have done like with hand-drawn maps. And so we can see what's really nice about this stratigraphy is that it reflects the basin-like shape that we see in the software. You can kind of see it already here. It's kind of sloping in this area. And then we were also really excited about this very dark charcoal stain on top of it. We were interpreting as maybe possible thatching or another form of maybe part of this what we were referring to as a house. And the other exciting thing is at the very bottom of it, here's the close-up of the stratigraphy that we're seeing. So we have kind of two charcoal-rich layers, this one on top, this one on the bottom. You can see there's unfortunately lots of earthworm movement throughout the stratigraphy, which is a little bit of concern for bioturbation for when it comes to dating, but overall, not too bad. And then what was really exciting was what in the center of it, which is this possible post-mold, which actually comes to a really nice point, which we didn't know if it was going to be a real feature, but we're really excited about how we found that. Now, we are really confident here that this is not a natural feature, but unfortunately, besides these kind of cultural features and within it, this whole basin was completely devoid of artifacts. And this is really perplexing and really frustrating for us as archaeologists, because we thought we did the survey, we thought we found an anomaly, we excavated the anomaly. The anomaly is a real circular basin-like feature, but there were no artifacts in it. And so why do I still kind of believe or say that this is a house basin? It really goes back to the literature of the few house sites we know in New England, and specifically the one farther south of us, which is the Skitchawag site. This site continues to be one of the most important archaeological sites in northern New England, and is also known as one of the first and earliest corn found in the region. And one thing I really like this, besides here, obviously we have storage pits in this one, they're about the same shape and size and depth of where we're finding ours as well, even though obviously the depositional vent's different. We're really happy to know that there's these features too. Now, as you can see in this feature, they actually found artifacts within these. So it's not a perfect conclusion on ours, but at least we knew that like these are similar to what some of the other house sites are like in the region. So we've discussed this and deeply thought about this pit feature. It still leaves lots of questions besides the lack of artifacts. And so what I ended up doing was deploying my own strategy for this. This is something that I went on did, we were about to give up on this and just not worry about it, but I was really determined that we could find material culture outside of these house basins or within this meadow. And so what I did is I looked through every single profile, which are this gray overlying this div 2, and scanned it to try to find a high reflective value, which are these are the ones in red, but when you're coming to 2, it could not necessarily appear as red in the slice maps. So I was desperately trying to look for it. So I combed through every single one and I found 11 points of high reflection values that I thought looked really clear as either a possible storage pit or some forms of artifacts that are also below. Since we did the excavation already, I knew how deep it was to get to this area prior to the current topsoil, the current A horizon that's going on over the active portion of the cornfield. So I looked at every single portion at below about 0.8 meters below the surface, and just combed through the data crucially to try to find evidence of any occupation, because at this point we were hoping that there were woodland action, but we weren't quite sure. So here's what the data kind of looked like, and you can kind of see in this area. This is kind of an unclipped version of it. So first we have the ground zero is this first dark line, and then you can see these large parabolas in here. And in here too, these are what we refer to as reflective values. So here, this looks like it could be some type of rock or other feature that's reflecting this parabola. And then here, this is a common feature that we have when you have like a pit-like feature that's filled with something. It creates this kind of bow tie cross-hatching effect. And there's these also kind of very high planar reflections here too. You can even see what we were interpreting as possibly as this like dark stain that we saw earlier that was on top of the house basin feature. This is going to cause a reflection because it's a different soil than the surrounding soil around it. So this is what we're seeing as these like higher planar reflections along the way. Continuing, just another example of some of the other kind of profiles that we're seeing, or radiograms that have these higher features. Here you can see kind of a nice little ditch feature with this blue planar reflection, another kind of ditch feature here with this cross hatching, and there's tons of material around this way. So it's not like there's nothing in the south field. We know that we could find it, but I was really excited about this feature here, routine where 9 and 6 highlighted here, because unlike these other features, it looks even closer to like the plane drawing of Skitchawag, where we have a large house basin about 3 meters in width, and then what looks like on the offshore of it, a pretty large storage pit. Obviously, like they're surrounded by these high reflective values. So I was really excited about this. What I ended up doing is I didn't have time at this time to do a full other excavation, but I used what I mentioned before by looking at these profiles and trying to find moments where we could find material culture beneath it. And so I went out there and I didn't even do the full 11 shovel test pits because I was so excited that it worked and we were able to find material culture. So we found a few flakes and firecracked rock. And so now we know that there was I covered a hearth feature and some other things in there. This is where the firecracked rock comes from. So now we know for sure that around the surrounding areas, there is a material culture. There is material culture that suggests that these features are not just a natural phenomenon, but are most likely culturally made artifacts, and how I would interpret it as a house basin. One of the other things that we ended up doing that we've been implementing recently, like later since we took tons of bulk samples. including phytolith samples and as well as samples for OSL as well. We were really confused by the lack of artifacts, so we really wanted to collect as many samples as we want in case we missed something. And so we found these seeds, which I'm still determining. I'm not a macrobot expert, but we really found that we found stuff within their area of head, and we use this to also get some charcoal dating samples as well. The last time I gave this talk in this version, we hadn't run the charcoal samples, but since then we were able to run one, and we got a date to about 1516 to 1591, a common era. And it could be possibly earlier depending on the calibration curve. So, obviously this is really late leading up to the protohistoric or the early contact period. So we're really excited about that date because it's a little bit, it's kind of the edge between kind of this colonial lab stuff, which makes sense. That's fine. We would love it to be a little bit earlier, but not too much earlier. So we're really happy that this date kind of suggests this kind of woodland time period. Now, in the past, I used to ask for other people's interpretation of our stratigraphy, and I still would love to hear other people's feedback about this. But since I've been spending over a year getting ready for my dissertation and working towards research, I came across Diana Lee Duquette's 2003 dissertation on archaic expressions, in which she talks about this empty pit scenario where we have these empty pits all throughout. This is in southern New England and Connecticut along the Connecticut Valley, where she's discussing these archaic expressions that she's dated that are empty and whether or not that these are natural features or cultural phenomenon. She has an entire workflow to describe what these could be. And she comes across with the solution that it is indeed a house basin site, and including citing things, because one of the other things we thought these might be would be natural windthrows. And she has a really great breakdown and cited many other work that's happened about whether or not these are true cultural features or just natural windthrows. And I'm really happy to say that after looking at that, our features are too circular in nature to be kind of these windthrow or these natural phenomenon. So that convinced me even farther that these are for sure like house basins or possibly house sites. There could be some other form of culturally made formations for processing, but due to their size, it seems like we're pretty confident about that. And then lastly, I circled it back. I just want to end briefly on what's next in this region and what my plans next are. And so we have worked on the larger oxbow. This is just in this lower portion that we just worked on, which is the CNR farm, the Huntington CNR farm. And at this site, we just did a small magnetic survey. And this is before we realized that the magnetics were not going to work out well. But I'm hoping within the next 2 weeks, go back out there and do a proper radar survey. And there's known archaeological sites within there too. And this is the same area where we knew that there was the Beneke Fort that was known to still have remnants existing in the early 19th century. So, and it's still a very common place for looters and people picking up lithics that are kind of scattered there. So we're really hoping to get over there sooner than later to kind of document these things in real time. And so finally, here's just some of the citations for some of the work that I've kind of taken from and want to just give respect to other people who've done really great work in their area and things that I'm drawing my research on. And then finally, I just wanted to thank for my funding, which was the National Science Foundation Archaeometry Program, the Newcomb Institute for Complex, the Elfrida Frank Foundation, and my advisor and our team at Sparkle, as well as so many people who helped us dig, including the Oxbow High School, and especially thanks to Steve Vixie and Tim Carson and the entire Carson family for letting us work at their farm, as well as the Huntington farm who lets us work there, and also thanks to all the future farms that will help us work there as well. So yeah, I would love questions. That's all I have for you, and really appreciate all of you sticking around and listening to me kind of talk about all this work.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. As Jonathan said, anyone have any questions, please let us know. There's the chat function. You can also raise your hand on Zoom and then we can call on you. Yeah, does anyone have any questions?
Hey, this is Dan Cassidy. I've got a comment as much as a question. I just want to say, hey, thanks. This is just so exciting to see your work in this area and get these results. There, some of us old timers that have been hanging around the region have been so frustrated by the lack of data that we just knew the stuff was out there, and it's just it's really exciting to see you expose this stuff in a really systematic and careful way, and really looking forward to your ongoing investigations, because it's a really important contribution that we've all been looking for a long time. So thank you.
I really appreciate it. Yeah, I kind of been framing this as the kind of the village settlement debate between like, there's Robert Hasseltob's like famous, where are the late Woodland villages paper, that he says that they're out there, and everyone who's ever written stuff cites that article, which is like really crucial. And but it's really frustrating too, because a lot of the other people work here who I really respect their work too, like not just showcase that we just don't have the evidence to show that just yet. And I really know I'm an optimist. I want to believe that it's there, and I know that we've kind of found a way to do this. So I'm really hoping, and it's not going to work everywhere. And there's still going to be a bias, because a lot of this material in geophysical surveys is really difficult to do in like forested areas, for example. And then with rapid deforestation, we don't know exactly what the depositional environment is for some of this equipment can really work in. But even if we just expose this material along, the river valleys and the kind of these open pastures and farmlands, I think that's a hopefully really important contribution.
Absolutely.
So we have another question in chat from Karen Dresser. Do you know if there were any slash and burn agricultural practices that might impact the charcoal layers?
Yeah, that's a really great question. There's an ongoing debate, and it's kind of interesting because a lot of the work that has been going on here, I mean, there's Delcourt when you're talking about large slash burn agriculture and kind of controlled burnings, pre-contact burnings. There once again seems to be not as much evidence of this. But with that said, the earliest colonial texts, even in Champlain's earliest text, mentions about the coastal communities of probably most likely Massachusetts were burning these areas. We would have to do a lot more work to determine if that was the case in this area. Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that I'm about to jump into next. But it's interesting because a lot of that debate about whether there's this large controlled use of fire is not necessarily happening specifically within archaeologists, but a lot of the paleoclimatologists working in the area. So I noticed that, and there's a great text, a lot of the great text work on there, a lot of the New England, early New England Holocene work and such. So yeah, unfortunately don't have a clear answer on that, but I'm hoping to kind of work to learn more about that soon.
Awesome. Another question a question from Steve Aldine. What were the round things you used for dating? Were those nuts? And I believe that's in reference to what you were talking about.
Yeah, we can. I would love. I'm not a macrobot. It's something too. Let me pull that up. Sorry. Oops, sorry, I went too far. Yeah, these guys. Yeah, so I'm not macrobot trained, and we have some people who work in microbot, who work with phytoliths and other smaller things. I'm not quite sure what these are. I was nervous that these were actually ectorhizal, ECM fungi, which is associated with pine trees of the region. They're not that. I contacted a mycorrhizal fungal expert who was here at Dartmouth, and they're like, that's not that, which is great to know. I was nervous that it was actually vetch, a hairy vetch, and this is coming from a cover crop that enters through the column stuff. But then I bought a bunch of vetch seeds and then contacted a vetch expert, and they didn't know either. So I haven't had I'm working on getting additional funding to kind of get this properly processed, but it's to be determined. But I just wanted to showcase that we're doing flotation in this area, which obviously has been adopted more recently, but is such a late adoption for this area. And so we're hoping to find more and more. The flotation has been critical. We found, like I mentioned, we found a trade bead using flotation, which was awesome. And that was in like a different site, but it was it's been really kind of crucial. And we did a collaborative effort. So anyway, go along the way. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't know if anyone else knows. Would love to have your interpretations. I'll write them down because we've got a lot of suggestions. I had a lot of people reach out to me. Some people thought they were radish. They're not. I've bought a lot of different varieties of radish seed. They're not radish. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. We have a question from Dave Lacey. He says, hi, very interesting. I was curious if you considered coring to check some of these stratigraphic patterns rather than moving that so much dirt. It might let you sample a much greater number of anomalies. Nice work. Cheers, Dave.
Yeah, I'm really good with that. I definitely, yes. So I've thought about coring more recently, and it's something that we're probably going to end up doing kind of all along the different terraces. So one of the kind of difficult things on this is, as I showed, is where the corn's located. So like we're in a really crucial time period right now where, when I can do my field work. So luckily, before I start coring, I want to locate places where I can do more coring to do it. One of the biggest issues is like what we find with the coring, and the chances of like hitting a specific artifact could be difficult. Finding phytoliths, I was really hoping could work, but the issue is with it is that since it's still an active cornfield, we'd find finding corn phytoliths won't necessarily help us say that whether there was corn there prior, because there's corn still happening there. So it's something that I'm trying to figure out how much we could learn from coring. Then one thing nice about coring that we can do is that we can grab charcoal samples from there too and start dating some of these terraces to try to get more evidence about actually the age of how the river's meandering, which I think is incredibly important because a lot of the sites along rivers and that we see in the archaeological record are just along the banks. It is part of these eroding the eroding banks of the river. That's where we're kind of locating these. Sketchewog as well was found in the kind of this eroding portion of the river. So if we can find actually these houses a little bit farther up from the river as well, it can kind of showcase more about what's going on and how old these sites are just based off of the movement of the river throughout time. That people are kind of moving closer where they're living adjacent to the river. So yeah, that's a kind of a long, convoluted answer that it's been thought about. The question is what we can answer and learn from it, as well as something still I'm working towards.
Awesome. And Angela, I see your hands raised.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this, Jonathan. As a transplant from the Pioneer Valley, it's really exciting to see this kind of archaeology happening further upstream. I was curious because, you're one of the few groups who have been able to do these types of methods on a large landscape scale and start detecting a number of anomalies, which I understand you're still testing. Have you been able to note any kind of pattern to those anomalies that could inform CRM methods for sampling and detecting these types of sites, because that's obviously the majority of archaeology that's going on along our riverbanks? So I'm thinking of things like field walkovers. If the farmer has just plowed the field, are you seeing registers of this cultural activity, and also transects and spacing of those transects? So is there anything that you can provide for guidance for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. I didn't mention this. So one reason why we don't see this material culture really pop up in the meadow there is because they do no-till agriculture in this area, so they're not coming up. Versus the other farm, they are tilling, so we see things pop up there more and more. But for areas, especially because no-till is becoming more popular, and for soil resolution, there's lots of reasons for it. What's really great, and I can kind of showcase it in just even if you don't find these places, but in the profiles, what I really like about it is you can see the stratigraphy within the profile. So if we can map using this paleosols essentially, or like buried A horizons of past human activity, I think this is a really crucial technique that it can be cheap and fast. And so that when you're doing a new survey for CRM, and if you're doing the first, stage one or, archaeological story, you can do a much more targeted search. So I think that this is a really crucial way. I mean, you can already see just in this one too, we kind of have two very large planar reflections here too, and they don't teeter out fully. So this is something that's clearly like a cultural phenomenon. That's not a natural phenomenon happening there, just based off of how things are being deposited. So I think that that's really the crucial insight, is that we can go in there and have a much more informed version of prospecting to figure out exactly what's there. But yeah, it is tough because even in these features, they're so subtle, even within the sub two. That's why it really is important to go back to these profiles, because it's still not clear exactly what these are, but you can at least inform, oh, hey, like don't need to focus on in this area because unfortunately it's been just wiped clean. And so you can even tell within these sub two if there's been large areas of things being moved and other work. And I want to say that a lot of these are like pre-context sites even within this too, but we know that there were burying trash in these fields prior to them too. So at one point, we dug up a magnetic anomaly that ended up being like an 1850s sewing machine, and it was below this horizon. So like some of these don't necessarily have to be pre-contact or like, but I think that that's enough still too. That still would be cool for a CRM for purpose as well. Like that's still awesome. So I think that this is a way. And what's nice is that, radars, ground penetrating radars are becoming cheaper and more readily available and powerful enough. In the past, they used to not be this high resolution. They used to not go as ground depth, but like now with like dual frequency and step frequency antennas, you can get like, I would say in this area, we're getting about, it starts teetering around about 3 to 4 meters. We start losing it. So that's plenty of material for us to kind of prospect already in this area. In some areas as well, like it doesn't work really well with salt water, but you can do it in snow. So like when we did like the Mount Holly survey, like you can really use this all year round. So it could even extend like jobs for CRM companies too, if you want to keep staff around, because you can do this surveys all season. Which is probably like, I thought I'd be having to work in snow, but lately I've been working in like shorts and a t-shirt. It's been so warm. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question or as a possible CRM purpose.
Thank you. And I think probably we'll have time for one final question here. Linda Parody says, I'm curious if some locations had spiritual value to the early peoples. My land on the river is located in the Orford Fairley area, where the 3 large hills/mountains reach near the river: Cottonstone Mountain, Sawyer Mountain, and the Palisades.
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of these areas, obviously Cowes comes from like Nabenaki Algonquin place name. And so all these areas have some specific cultural significant value. We find this kind of consistently all throughout any area where we have like confluence of big rivers or falls. And so I can't say specifically what those values are, but we know that these areas, specifically right where the Connecticut River splits off into its, where the confluence of the wells, the Amonoosuc and the Connecticut, there's a moment in the Connecticut River where you can, between the state of New Hampshire and Vermont is literally like less than 6 feet. It's a really narrow passage. And these things would often be talked about as an important like spiritual moment. The Bellows Falls petroglyphs, for example, is like a very famous falls where we have those petroglyphs. And we know within the ethnohistoric record that this was an important part for the Abenaki in this area. So how specific they are is, I wouldn't be able to say that for sure, but we know that these are importantly cultural areas. And I think in Vermont specifically, like I was just doing this along like in historic Cowes, but you could have done this in any of the other main capitals in Vermont as well, to kind of locate these and document them.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, unless anyone has any last second questions, looking through chat one last time. Perfect. Well, Jonathan, thank you again. We appreciate it and hope to hear more in the future. Look forward to it.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate